Knockdown is one of the most common states in Melee, however, it is also one of the most mysterious. I first realized this a long time ago as a Falcon main when I struggled to find consistency in punishing knockdown opponents. After down airing them, they wouldn't always pop up as I wanted them to. Sometimes they'd get meteored back down into the ground. This didn't make sense to me considering knockdown appeared to be a grounded state. As I watched other players deal with knockdown opponents, I realized that similar issues existed with other characters. With Falco, for example, Shine would sometimes send knockdown opponents tumbling, allowing Falco to follow up with pillar combos, but other times Shine would cause Falco's knockdown opponent to become actionable shortly afterward, preventing Falco from following up with anything meaningful. Eventually, I began to suspect that knockdown had a distinct set of rules and properties, as there was no other explanation for these inconsistencies. Not only did this theory end up being correct, but some of knockdown's properties would end up being more bizarre than I ever could have imagined. In this video, I'll be going over all the secrets behind knockdown. I also want to credit my friend Altimore for helping me research this subject, and for providing some of the information I'll be showing you. If you're a fan of this kind of Melee content, please don't forget to subscribe. Before we begin, let's go over some of the basics behind knockdown. When your character tumbles, then lands on the ground and fails to tech, they will enter a state called DownBound for 26 frames. Depending on whether your character landed face up or face down, their DownBound animation will face the same direction. Then, after DownBound completes, your character will transition into downweight, which is the resting state. From downweight, you can input a regular getup that lasts 30 frames, a getup roll that lasts 35 frames, or a getup attack that lasts 49 frames. The getup options I just listed can also be buffered during the initial 26-frame downbound. For example, if you begin holding the analog stick to the side during downbound, your character will transition directly into a getup roll after downbound finishes, which means they will never enter downweight. Similarly, you can press the A, B, or Z button during downbound to transition directly into a getup attack. Now that we're familiar with downbound and downweight, I'll be introducing a more advanced animation called down damage. Down damage is an animation that goes by so quickly that the naked eye can barely even see it, but its significance is well known. This is because down damage is the animation responsible for a jab reset. By slowing down this clip in which Falco jabs Fox at 0%, you'll notice that Fox enters an animation called down damage once Falco's jab makes contact. The first frame of down damage begins on the first frame of hit lag. Then, 12 more frames of down damage come afterward, which means there are 13 frames of down damage in total. Fox is then forced into a regular getup after down damage completes. This sequence is known as a jab reset. The first question this sequence poses is, why did Fox enter down damage to begin with? The answer is that when a character is hit out of downbound, downweight, or down damage itself, the game checks to see if the victim took less than 7%. If so, then they will enter down damage. While this means that Falco's jab will always cause a knockdown character to enter down damage, it is important to realize what this means for moves that deal just enough damage to be above the cutoff. Fox's dash attack and Sheik's forward tilt, for example, deal exactly 7%, while Falco's shine deals 8%. If these moves were to stale even slightly, they would deal less than 7%, which would cause the opponent to enter down damage. To see why this matters, watch what happens when Falco shines a knockdown Fox several times in a row. The first shine causes Fox to tumble, and so does the second one. However, Falco's shine is now too stale to deal 7%, and so the third shine causes Fox to enter down damage. Fox can be seen lying down horizontally in the air while he's in this state. He then becomes airborne and actionable after it completes. Whenever Fox, Falco, or Sheik use the moves I listed, they should look to avoid down damage. Therefore, it is best for them to keep track of when these moves become stale. Fortunately, the staling queue in Melee is easy to understand. The game keeps track of the 9 most recent moves that have landed on an opponent and assigns them a staleness that ranges from 9% to 1%. This means that a single move can be staled by as much as 45%, although that will almost never happen. Usually you'll be using a variety of moves which will cause older moves to gradually move down the queue until they are pushed out. The key thing to know is that if Fox's dash attack or Sheik's forward tilt are staled at all, they will deal less than 7%. Falco's shine, on the other hand, can be slightly stale and still deal 7%, but it'll have to move down the queue if it ever becomes too stale. Although down damage isn't a desirable outcome for combo starters like Falco's shine, it is highly desirable when you're looking to jab reset your opponent. This leads us to another question. What are the exact requirements for a jab reset to occur? The first requirement is somewhat obvious, but the victim has to make it back down to the ground floor by the end of down damage, otherwise they'll enter fall. This explains why Fox entered fall when he was hit by Falco's stale shine. Fox was nowhere near the ground in that scenario. Falco's jab, however, causes Fox to incur much less vertical knockback, which means it is possible for Fox to reach the ground by the end of down damage. The way this happens is as follows. Falco's jab inflicts some vertical knockback on Fox. However, Fox's gravity statistic resists this knockback by influencing him downward on every frame that he's airborne. If Fox's gravity is able to exceed his vertical knockback, which it will at lower percents, then Fox will be jab reset. Fox can also use SDI and ASDI to influence himself upward and escape a jab reset at earlier percents than usual. Eventually, though, there comes a percent where a jab reset can no longer work, as Fox's knockback will be enough to exceed his gravity by itself. Due to microscopic differences between Fox's face-up and face-down knockdown states, this happens at 84% and 87% respectively when Fox is hit by Falco's jab. However, jab resets aren't as simple as the percents before these being identical to each other. Even between 0 and 83%, there's still something Falco has to be wary of whenever he jabs Fox. The difference between these percents has to do with the amount of hit stun Fox would normally take from Falco's jab. Between 0 and 31%, Fox takes 13 or less frames of hit stun, but the amount of hit stun he takes scales up to 23 frames after that. The reason this matters is because whenever down damage comes into play, the victim will only transition directly into regular getup if they would have taken 13 or less hit stun. If they would have taken more hit stun than that, then the residual hit stun frames turn into down weight frames that come after down damage. For example, if Fox would have taken 18 frames of hit stun, then he will incur 5 frames of down weight. As for how these down weight frames matter, Fox is able to input whichever getup option he pleases as soon as they start. If Fox chooses none of these options, then a regular getup will be forced after down weight finishes. The problem, though, is that Fox's ability to choose a getup roll or getup attack makes the jab reset sequence much less predictable for Falco. Rather than knowing that Fox will be forced into a regular getup, Falco now has to worry about other options that may catch him off guard. For this reason, jab resets lose their effectiveness once the attack would cause more than 13 frames of hit stun. The next secret to know about is that certain frames of DownBound are actually considered airborne. To recap, DownBound is the initial 26-frame animation that takes place when a tumbling character lands on the ground. During DownBound, the character can be seen bouncing up and down. This part of the animation isn't just for show. During the frames where the character is visibly above the ground, they're in a state that possesses certain airborne traits. The main significance of these airborne frames is that meteors and spikes won't be treated as though the victim is grounded. Instead, they will send the victim back down into the ground as though they were meteored or spiked from the air. This is usually undesirable since it will either cause the victim to enter downbound again or transition into regular landing lag. Both of these outcomes are worse than the alternatives of launching the victim upward or keeping them in grounded hit stun. Luckily, there is a workaround to DownBound's airborne frames, and that is to wait until the character in DownBound becomes grounded again. Whether the character in DownBound is face up or face down, this always happens at the very end of the animation. A good rule of thumb to remember is that there's always a 3-frame window where the character regrounds at the end of DownBound. By timing your meteor or spike for these reground frames, the character in DownBound has no way of stopping you from receiving the outcome you're looking for. The final hidden trait of Knockdown also stems from the airborne frames of DownBound that I just introduced. The existence of these airborne frames conflicts with a technique called floorhugging that is essential in today's metagame. Floorhugging is a subject that I've gone over in several of my previous YouTube videos. The gist of floorhugging is that through the use of ASDI down, the victim is able to hug the floor after hit lag rather than being launched airborne. This is the gateway for performing techniques such as techs in place, tech rolls, and slide-offs after being attacked. An example of floorhugging's usefulness can be seen in these side-by-side clips in which Fox is back-aired by Jigglypuff. Rather than accepting the outcome of flying off stage, it is much better for Fox to floor-hug Jigglypuff's back-air, then fast-fall to the ledge. Floorhugging is such a powerful technique that it goes without saying that disabling your opponent's ability to floorhug would be incredibly useful, which is why it is important to know that DownBound has the potential to do exactly that. To show you what I mean, let's revisit the chart that shows when each character's face-up DownBound animation transitions to airborne. For Fox, this happens on frame 5. Now, watch what happens when Fox enters frame 5 of DownBound in-game. On this frame, a 9-frame countdown starts. This is an ECB update countdown, and once it completes, Fox's ECB will become recognized as airborne. An ECB refers to the orange diamond in the center of a character that determines when they collide with surfaces such as the floor. In this case, we're concerned with Fox's ECB because it will affect his ability to floor hug. The ECB update that I just highlighted works the same way for every character. It begins on the first airborne frame of DownBound and it completes 9 frames later. This means that Fox's update will always complete by the 14th frame of his face-up downbound. So what is the significance of this ECB update? To find out, let's take a look at what happens when Marth forward smashes Fox in a few different scenarios. First, let's have Marth forward smash Fox as he stands atop a platform. Notice how Fox's ECB is tall and makes contact with the floor in this scenario. This is a grounded ECB that allows Fox to floor hug after hit lag ends. Now, watch what happens when we let Fox make it to frame 14 of downbound before being hit by Marth's forward smash. Now, Fox's ECB is updated to an airborne ECB that doesn't make contact with the floor. Fox is unable to floor hug with this ECB, and so he is sent flying off stage. Based on this information, it would seem that Marth's forward smash has to hit Fox between frame 14 and 22 of downbound in order to exploit this weakness. However, the window is actually even more lenient than that. The real window for Marth to forward smash Fox such that his ECB updates is between frame 5 and 22. This is because once the countdown starts on frame 5, hit lag frames will contribute to it. Marth's tipper F smash happens to inflict 9 hit lag frames on Fox, which means the math lines up perfectly for Fox's ECB to update on the frame after hit lag. To see what I mean, take a look at this clip of Marth F-smashing Fox on frame 5 of downbound. Because Fox made it to frame 5, his countdown began, but now Fox spends 8 more frames in hit lag afterward. All of these hit lag frames contribute to the countdown, and by the time they elapse, there's only 1 frame to go until Fox's ECB updates. Fox's ECB then becomes airborne on the frame after hit lag, which prevents him from floor hugging. In summary, the following criteria must be met in order to deny a floor hug during downbound. First, the airborne frames of downbound must be reached so that the countdown can begin. Then, 9 or more frames must pass before the frame after hit lag so that the ECB update can complete. In the Marth vs. Fox scenario, for example, Marth F-smashed Fox on frame 5 of downbound. This gave Fox an extra 8 frames of hit lag after his countdown started, which meant that Fox's ECB updated on the frame after hit lag. In case you're wondering how to perform this technique with moves that deal less hit lag, the solution is to attack Fox slightly later than frame 5. Falco's back air, for example, deals 8 hit lag, and so you'd want to wait until frame 6 before hitting Fox with this move. Jigglypuff's back air, on the other hand, deals 7 hit lag, so you'd want to wait until frame 7. This way, Fox's ECB update will complete by the time hit lag ends. Finally, the last eligible frame for performing this technique is the last airborne frame of downbound. In Fox's case, his downbound is airborne until frame 22. The ability to prevent an opponent in downbound from floor hugging is subtle but incredibly significant, as it means being able to launch them into the air with confidence. This makes it especially deadly for your opponent to miss a tech so long as you know how to take advantage of it. The possibilities are endless with this technique, and every character can benefit from it. Hopefully this video has helped you understand knockdowns, loops, and hurdles. There are several of them to know about, but by incorporating this information, you'll be able to maximize your punishes against knockdown opponents.